And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is a briefing with me, Philip Davis, standing in for Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. This morning I'll be bringing you the latest political news, from the energy crisis to NHS dentist shortages and grooming gangs, with some discussion of course on that leadership race. But first, it's your news headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Chancellor will hold crisis talks with energy bosses as figures show households already owe suppliers £1.3 billion. Uswitch says the figure is 3 times higher than a year ago, and that will rise further as the cost of energy climbs. It's after the consultancy firm Cornwall Insight forecast that the energy price cap, will hit £4,200 in January. It's understood that Nadhim Zahawi and the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, will press energy executives for a breakdown of their expected profits and plans for the next 3 years. Conservative MP Teresa Villas accepts more support is needed to help low-income earners.
I fully accept, as does Rishi, that we will need to do more. That's why he says that if he becomes Prime Minister, he would immediately suspend VAT on domestic energy bills, and he recognises that further support is also going to be needed. But I would emphasise, I would provide the reassurance that the measures already being delivered will involve a £1,200 amount of support for 8 million households.
Education Secretary James Cleverly believes Liz Truss's plan to cut taxes will go a long way.
Liz has committed to a support package for the people that need it most. But what she has said is that the current tax level that we're experiencing, the highest in over 70 years, is unsustainable. And so she will be helping the people that need help directly. She'll be reducing the tax on people that pay tax. But ultimately, what we've got to do is we've got to boost the economy.
Royal Mail is warning strike action will make pay rises less affordable because of the financial impact it will have on the business. More than 115,000 staff are set to walk out for 4 days in the coming weeks in a dispute over wages. In a statement, the company described the move as an abdication of responsibility for the long-term job security of workers. The industrial action's due to take place on the 26th and 31st of August and also the 8th and 9th of September. British author and illustrator Raymond Briggs, best known for The Snowman, has died at age 88. More than 5.5 million copies of his book have been sold globally. The animated film has been shown every Christmas since it was created in 1982. The publisher, Penguin Random House, said the author leaves an extraordinary legacy and a big hole. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now, let's go to Philip for today's briefing.
Thank you, Rosie. Good morning and welcome to the briefing with me, Philip Davis. Let's kick off this morning's show talking about something that will impact us all. Fears grow of energy rationing for the UK over the coming winter, with some speculating the country could see a return to 1970s-style blackouts. More gloom adding to an already bleak picture, with estimates that the UK energy price cap could now top £4,200 in January. Well, joining me now is Angela Knight, former Chief Executive at Energy UK. Angela, thank you for joining us this morning. People will be wondering, why are prices rising so rapidly all of a sudden?
Yes, it's a lot of everything has come together, hasn't it? I mean, first of all, as we recovered from the pandemic, there was a global shortage of gas and electricity, which resulted in that normal problem that you have then, where the demand is high and the supply is not there. Followed on by a war, Russia versus Ukraine, and just as the West has said to Russia, we're going to be on the side of Ukraine, so Putin is playing gas wars with us, economic wars and psychological wars, by reducing the amount of energy that comes through. So again, that feeds into both availability but also price. Inflation, which is a worldwide problem, and now, the hot weather doesn't help either. And the reason I say the hot weather doesn't help is that some of the supplies which we would normally get in the UK and indeed elsewhere in Europe, which comes from Norway, is likely to be reduced because their reservoirs aren't full and they use hydroelectric power, which of course requires the water in those reservoirs. So you have the two things feeding together. One is the increasing prices, and the second is that there is an energy security issue. Having painted the gloomy picture, that doesn't mean that there's absolutely nothing that we can do and we face a really black winter. Not necessarily is the case. I mean, firstly, we still do have some old coal-fired power stations, and we need to just be prepared to use them. Indeed, Germany is using them as well. A lot of places have got backup diesel generators. By places, I mean things like hospitals and so on. And there will be an element of needing to use that. Then there is the you and the me and the business. And that is all our communities, whether domestic or whether they're business communities. We actually have to very carefully think exactly how much we are using and whether we can take some economies ourselves. My dad always used to say, when I was cold, he used to say, put on your cardigan. And then he used to have this wonderful expression when I left lights on saying, this isn't Blackpool illuminations, Small steps, slightly entertaining steps, small steps. But there's a bit of everything here to see us through the winter as far as security is concerned. But we do need to really, really seriously think about and have a mid and long-term plan as well.
What people might want to know is anybody here profiteering from this? Because, Centrica announced their profits fairly recently, which were immense, and it seems that the government are getting the energy companies in to ask what their projected profits are for the next 3 years or so. So there's an indication that the government feel that there might be some profiteering happening.
Yes, they do feel that. I would just caution. There is a sort of obvious reaction, which we all have, when you see a huge amount of profit being made by some big companies who sit within this firmament called energy. And don't forget, this runs from wind farms right the way to oil and gas extractors. So we need to sort of define what we mean by energy. But we have that instantaneous reaction when we see the big profits saying, well, look, is this fair or not? Now, what we have seen with Centrica and BP and others is what they call their upstream. That is, their drilling, which is global. They've made a lot of money because their costs have remained static, but, they have benefited from there being an increasing wholesale price for gas and for petrol and diesel, or for oil. And so they've made a windfall profit as a result of that. We can't tax everybody worldwide. What we can do is we can look at what is made within our jurisdiction and ask them to pay more on tax. Already, they pay about 40% corporation tax, which is round about twice what any other business makes. And from now on, they're going to be paying 65% corporation tax on that. So yes, there is a chunk of big money coming out of those companies who have made a big profit out of the world situation. I think the other things, though, that needs to be looked at is there's all about the distribution. That's the wires and the pipes. Now, that's a regulated amount of money that we all pay on our bills. There's a standing charge. We all pay that on our bills. Can we move the green taxes temporarily from our bills onto general taxation? And then there's some complex technical areas which resulting in us as having a higher local wholesale price for electricity in this country because of the way the algorithm works, which connects wind and gas together. And they need to alter that because that will bring down the wholesale price of electricity. So a mishmash of small steps bringing together, some of which should be permanent and some of which should be temporary, I think is important. And as far as investment is concerned, I hope they're also saying to the big energy companies, as far as their investment is concerned, get building the small-scale nuclear reactors, because you can do that in a couple of years and they cost a couple of billion. Now, that's time and that's money, but it's not as big a money as the big ones which come out at 20 billion, and it's not as long as the 10 or 12 years that you have to build those. So do those small-scale reactors, and that brings more of the security and indeed the cost within the control of the UK.
Angela Knight, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, waded into the Conservative leadership race at number 10 reception last night, declaring he's certain that whoever takes over from him will bail out struggling households. This afternoon at 5 p.m, Liz Truss will join Alistair Stewart and a live audience in Lee for a GBNews special, The People's Forum. The Conservative leadership candidate will have questions put to her by audience members. Well, in advance of that, we thought that we'd speak to somebody from the other side. And joining me now is Jacob Young, MP for Redcar, who is backing former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Jacob, thank you very much for joining us this morning. So, as I just said, Liz Truss is joining the People's Forum with Alistair Stewart this afternoon. What questions would you like to see the audience ask her?
Well, Philip, I went along to the Darlington hustings last night and listened to what both the candidates have to say. I'm open and honest about the fact that I support Rishi throughout it. One of the striking things that I think wasn't picked up on from Liz's remarks was actually how she would help people this winter. And we've just heard there from your previous guest about the difficulties that people are going to be facing this winter. And yet Liz's plans at the moment, I don't see offer any support for people who are on a very low income, whether that's national living wage or less. That she offers no support for pensioners. And I think that's a great worry for people going into the winter, which we know is going to be incredibly difficult.
Now, it seems to be, Jacob, a bad day for the Rishi campaign today. The Daily Express has come out in support of Liz Truss. We saw 10 new MPs come out for Liz Truss today, including Chris Skidmore, who was defected from the Rishi side to the Liz side. Is this a sign that the contest is all over bar the shouting?
Well, I don't think it is, because I think, Philip, you're a constituency member of Parliament just like me. You'll speak to your association and you'll hear what people are saying on the ground. And the way that I see it is more and more people, when they get an opportunity to either meet Rishi or hear from Rishi at one of the hustings or the leadership debates that we've seen so far, they're engaged by the plans that he has. He's got a sensible plan for the country going forward to help with the cost of living, help tackle energy prices, but also help get inflation down. And I think those are the key issues that matter to the general public as well. I think as a Conservative Party, we have a responsibility to not just elect someone who is ideologically right for us, but actually who is speaking to, not just to the Conservative Party, but to the country as a whole. And I think that Rishi does that because he understands that the issues that people are facing.
Now, one of the criticisms that lots of people have made in the Conservative Party about this contest is the blue-on-blue attacks that have been happening between the candidates. And, I think that it's fair to say it's been happening on both sides. But pretty recently, we've had people from the Rishi camp saying that Liz Truss is divorced from reality, that what she's proposing would be electoral suicide. I mean, do you really think that kind of language is helpful? Would you distance yourself from that kind of language about somebody who could be your Prime Minister within just a few weeks' time?
Well, I wouldn't use that language myself, but I think, we can't escape from the reality of what people are facing. We're going into this incredibly difficult winter period. And as I said last night at the hustings, Liz Truss didn't have an answer to how she would help pensioners. She didn't have an answer to how she would help people on the national living wage. Her response was to cut national insurance. Okay, well, you cut national insurance, and that benefits people who are on the national living wage by about £1 a week. It benefits people who are on £100,000 a year by about £1,000 a year. So, I look at it and think, where's the priorities here? Meanwhile, you've got, Rishi Sunak, who, while he was Chancellor, he knocked £400 off every household's energy bill. He cut the council tax for 20 million households in Britain. He raised the national insurance thresholds as well. So I think, we've got a clear contrast here of someone who's willing to step up and help people through this difficult time versus what I have to say is a plan that I don't think is going to work.
Jacob Young, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, moving on to the next thing, which is 90% of NHS dental practices in England are not accepting new patients, according to a survey conducted by the BBC and the British Dental Association. They say that an additional £880 million will be needed for UK dentistry to return to 2010 levels. Joining me now to discuss this is NHS dentist Mark Green. Mark, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Why is the situation so chronic?
It's become acute. It's been chronic for many, many years because of lack of anything being done about it. The governments of the last 10 to 12 years have refused to acknowledge there's a problem with the current contract, and they've been kicking the can far down the lane until now it's come to the point where they can't kick it any further, and it's become this acute crisis we've had. The problem's been there, it's just been ignored.
So what is the problem with the contract? What does the government need to do, or NHS England need to do, in order to sort it out?
Well, the contract is limiting the budget that can be spent on NHS dentistry. Therefore, once you've hit your targets, you can't see any more patients. And the funding was only for 50-odd% of the population anyway, so it's never been accessible to all. And with this crisis of living costs, and even NHS dentistry is not free at the point of service. So it's becoming a real difficult to keep an NHS practice going. So the dentists are having to look at other forms of income to fund their staff and all the increasing costs that they've had to endure as well.
So the situation's been a long time in the making. It's become acute. What's made it so acute? Is it the COVID lockdowns? Has that made the problem even worse?
It's like the perfect storm, the combination of factors. The contract that was withering on the vine has been actually killed off by a few factors, Brexit being one. Unfortunately, a lot of dentists were supporting the NHS were from the EU, and they've gone home now, as it were. And so we've got a shortage of dentists and a lack of planning for the future of graduates, the number of graduates coming through the system. And it takes 5 years to train to be a dentist, plus another year in a training practice before you get your NHS performer number. So that's 6 years. And then the dental schools are full because they've closed them down over the past 20-odd years. So it's a lack of foresight, which is not unusual for this government, is it? Let's be honest.
So, the figures from the survey showed that 90% of dental practices are not accepting new adult patients, 80% are not accepting new children as patients, and in a third of the country, no NHS dentists are taking new patients at all. Are you able to take new patients at the moment? Is your list closed?
We've got a waiting list that we can add names to, but it is growing, not shrinking. And the numbers that are coming off are obviously less than the ones that are coming onto it. It's been like that since I've been here for a year and a half now. And I'm full. I mean, I've got patients waiting. After I've done this call, I've got someone downstairs ready to have some work done. And it is non-stop. And there's no one coming up who can see a future in the NHS side of dentistry.
And just quickly, Mark, if I can, obviously people are really worried about this. I know from my own postbag that people are worried about this. What should people do in the meantime, in the time it's taking to get on to an NHS dentist? What would you advise people to do? We're hearing all about DIY dentistry and this kind of thing. What would your advice to people be?
Well, obviously, prevention is better than cure. So really look after your teeth. There was a problem particularly with children in the lockdown years, that they were at home, and so the snacking was an issue. So constantly going to the fridge or the cupboard to get something to eat, and that's damaging to the health of the teeth, obviously. And when they're at school, they can't do that so much. So we've seen a problem with that. But also, if you've got an emergency problem, 111, NHS 111 can hopefully direct you to a practice. We have an hour put aside every day for 111 patients to attend, and they're coming from miles away. They're coming from, a round trip of 3 hours just to get something sorted, which is frankly ridiculous in this day and age, isn't it?
Mark, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it. And finally today, Conservative leadership candidate and former Chancellor Rishi Sunak has pledged to crack down on child grooming gangs by locking up offenders for life and offering, quote, very limited options for parole. Last week, Esther and I spoke to Rishi Sunak and asked him about his plans.
I have two young girls who are 9 and 11, and I think for too long we just haven't focused on this issue, Philip. And it's a horrific crime that is affecting actually not just girls in a few places. It's far more pervasive across the country than actually we all realise. And we all know the reason that people don't focus on it. It's because of political correctness, and they're scared of calling out the fact that there's a particular group of people who are perpetuating these crimes. And I think that's wrong. And I want to change that as Prime Minister. So what I've said is we'll have a new task force at the National Crime Agency that's focused on this. We will have a requirement for police forces everywhere to prioritise this. I want to make sure that all police forces record the ethnicity of those involved, which currently is not done because people don't want to do that. And I want to create a brand new life sentence for those involved in grooming with very limited options for parole, because I'm not going to let political correctness stand in the way of tackling this absolutely horrific crime.
I'm joined now by Billy Howarth, founder of Parents Against Grooming UK. Billy, what did you make of what Rishi Sunak had to say there?
If it goes that way, I'll be happy. I will be really happy with that. Because at the moment we're seeing them get 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. So yeah, lifetime in prison will be more of a deterrent than 2 years or 4 years.
Now, you've done an awful lot of campaigning about this issue. Is the problem still as bad as it ever was, or are things improving around the towns across the country?
Absolutely not. We're just bringing it to light more. It's happening all across the country, in every town. It's widespread, it's massive.
And aside from what Rishi had to say there, is there anything else that you would like to see the new Prime Minister do to tackle this, or would Rishi's plans would that be all you needed to see?
No, absolutely not. There's more work to be done on this situation, on these crimes. I think top-down reform is needed on children's services right across the country. I believe accountability is needed for those that were malfeasant during these initial scandals around the country, not just with the grooming scandal, but going so far back to like YouView School, for example. There needs to be accountability, top-down reform.
Rishi mentioned in that clip that he thought that political correctness had been getting in the way of tackling this particular issue. From your perspective, are local authorities and the police now more likely to intervene and not pussyfoot around this subject?
My town's a Labour-led town, so absolutely not. They covered it then, they'll cover it now. It's all about keeping integrity for them. So no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that it's got any better. I believe there was complicit then in the abuse of children. I believe we're still complicit now by their inaction.
And so in Rochdale, where you are, where obviously this was a massive issue, is it still a massive issue in Rochdale? Is it still happening regularly? Are the police still not doing enough to tackle it?
Well, we're now talking about Oldham. What's the goings on in Oldham, which is right next door to Rochdale. Same men, different towns, so it shows how widespread it was. Not all these men were convicted back in 2014. Only nine of them were convicted. There was many, many more who wasn't convicted, who are still there on the streets, still doing what they did then. Now,
I'm from Bradford, and it's a big issue in Bradford, particularly in Keighley, which is the next-door constituency to mine. And the local MP there, Robbie Moore, has been calling on the council to have a sort of a Rotherham-style inquiry into child sexual exploitation and grooming. Do those inquiries help? Did the inquiry in Rotherham actually help to tackle the problem in places like Rotherham?
Yeah, it's good that these inquiries take place, but they're not deep in scope. I don't believe they're speaking to the right people. I don't believe they're addressing all survivors. I think they're cherry-picking who to speak to try and dilute it down a bit. So in Rotherham, 8 police officers were found in misconduct during that report. The most severe punishment was 1 written warning. So what are the outcomes to these? Must be accountability, and that's not accountability.
Billy, thank you very much indeed for what you do in tackling this particular issue, but also thank you very much for joining us this morning. Well, that's it. The time's flown by. That's the end of the briefing with me. You'll be pleased to know that Tom Harwood will be back in his rightful place tomorrow morning. Don't forget Liz Truss on the People's Forum at 5 p.m. with Alistair Stewart later today, where she'll be answering your questions. But coming up next, it's To The Point with the wonderful Bev Turner. But first, it's the weather.
Good morning. Dry, hot and sunny is the story for just about all of us through the rest of the week. There is an exception. That's the far north and northwest of Scotland, where this weather front will bring thicker cloud and very occasional outbreaks of rain. But look at this area of high pressure, a huge area of high pressure, keeping the weather quiet and settled right the way through the rest of the week and into the weekend, and allowing those temperatures to gradually climb day on day and in fact by night as well. I mentioned the exception to the clear skies. That's this weather front's just clipping the far northwest of Scotland at times today. That will maybe be thick enough for a few spots of light rain or drizzle, but otherwise it's a dry picture. It's blue skies and it's pretty much wall-to-wall sunshine, with those temperatures responding up into the high 20s, perhaps touching the low 30s for parts of England and Wales later on today. I mentioned the nighttime temperatures will be climbing as well, so a little bit more uncomfortable for sleeping over the next few nights. Tonight we will see clear skies right the way across the bulk of the UK. Again, still this thicker cloud for the far northwest. We also could well see some low cloud and mist developing around some coasts of Northern Ireland, as well for some coastal parts of East Anglia. That may just come inland a little bit on Thursday morning. However, it should burn back fairly readily once that sunshine gets going on Thursday. And Thursday is again another day of blue skies and sunshine, and those temperatures continuing to climb. In fact, it's from Thursday that the Met Office have issued an amber extreme heat warning for parts of England and eastern Wales, and that warning is valid right the way through Thursday